This bargain basement Bentley Bentayga was listed as is at a wholesale auction where it was marked with an inoperable air suspension, a problem that sounded frightening enough to warrant a pretty steep discount on what would normally be a six-figure luxury SUV. But what caused this suspension to sag ended up being so silly, it almost didn't make any sense. The second I took a look on the underside of the car, I saw its ride height sensors dangling and a little stud broken on either side. In a whole 20 minutes, I got this car on ramps, replaced each bolt, and we were back gliding across the road. There was only one problem. Its air conditioner was blowing very warm, something super noticeable, especially in a black-on-black Bentley in South Florida. After hooking up a set of HVAC gauges and doing a quick diagnosis, we had the symptoms of a failed air compressor, which is located right at the bottom of this engine. It's easy to put your hands on it. We even got its belt off pretty quick, but we quickly found out that there's bolts holding this part to the engine in places we wouldn't really be able to reach unless we started ripping the entire front end of it apart. You see, to repair most any parts on the front of this Bentley, you have to completely dismantle it, a job which the workshop manual says requires an engine hoist and 8 hours of labor to perform. And while you might think this is a problem associated with just high-end exotic cars, it's really become very common on a lot of the newer European autos. As more power and more accessories are being placed into smaller packages, they have to make the best of the available space by cramming everything into a front-end assembly. It's why on this V6 Audi, in order to do anything on the front of the engine, we had to remove its wheels, arch liners, and then had to pull the front bumper and its front frame and core support components forward, which gives you a generous couple of inches to perform the job. Now, it might not seem like a lot, but I've learned time after time that every inch counts, especially when you're in a tight space. And in order to perform this job to completion, I read and reread the Bentley shop manual to make sure I could definitely remove and replace this air conditioning compressor without getting stuck along the way. And what I found out is that this Bentley is very similar to what we just described, that all of its coolers are mounted as one in an assembly, and this assembly needs to come out of the car, which again requires the wheels, the liners, also the coolant to be drained since the radiator hose isn't long enough to stay connected to the car, and then the front bumper off. But we've got one stark difference here. While most cars have a front bumper that surrounds the entire front end of the car and wraps around its body, this Bentley has just a small lower bumper. A major part of its front end body is these huge front fenders that retain each side headlamp. In addition to the front core support, the front fenders must also be removed, and to get to the fenders, you have to lower part of the rockers. Truly, this job seems overly intense just to replace a single front end accessory. I even considered just biting the bullet and paying for it to be done at the dealer, but with a quote of over $5,000 between the labor and parts price, I pulled our Bentley back under a nice shady tree when my attention was diverted by a very intriguing email. And the subject line read, local singles looking for... Oh, that's the wrong one. The subject line read, Bentley AC compressor tip. And the email said, hey Sam, I just watched your video on the Bentley with no AC. I was a VW Audi mechanic for 10 years, and during this time, I replaced so many compressors that were actually just bad refrigerant control valves. Now, I have not done a compressor on a Bentayga, so I don't know what the axis is like, but you may be able to get the RCV out without removing the compressor at all. If you have to remove the compressor to gain access to the RCV, then you're most likely better off replacing the entire compressor since it's such a big job. But the RCV fixes probably 80% of the VW Audi compressors in my experience. Anyway, I hope this helps. And this is from Ryan at RKX Tech, and he sent me a link to his site which sells various refrigerant control valves, and they all seem to cost right around $50. So after exchanging a few emails with Ryan, I learned that even though there's a high rate of failure with these valves, the dealer doesn't consider it a serviceable item, which means they don't sell them. They just want you to buy an entirely new compressor. And with so many different styles of these valves, there's no real parts catalog where you can just plug in your year, make, and model to find the right one. He said that in some cases, the same compressors will use different valves to fit different applications, so it's a bit of a tricky part to track down. Now, if we go back and look at when we had this Bentley on the lift, you can clearly see where there's a little electrical connector running to what has to be the refrigerant control valve. Our axis here really couldn't be any better. So if all it's going to take is to pull this out and replace it with a new one, well, it shouldn't be much harder than just pumping up your tires, which nowadays is as simple as it gets with Fantik's X9 Ultra. It's their most powerful inflator yet, and it just added 17 PSI to this 21-inch SUV tire in just over a minute. It's 6 times faster than traditional portable inflators, and with a 25,000 milliamp battery, it can do it over and over and over again. And with 3 USB outs, it doubles as a portable power pack on the go. Now, I've used Fanttik tire inflators for the last few years, but the X9 Ultra is a game changer for me because of what you see right here. Between my truck and the trailer, including spares, there are 10 tires here, and every time I go to the auction to pick up a car that's been sitting a while, you'll always find a few flat tires on it. With its increased battery capacity and pump strength, not only is it much quicker to inflate a tire, I don't have to worry about the inflator running out of power. And since it's super portable, it comes along with me when I'm on the road. Now, I went and dropped an Amazon link down in the description box for the X9 Ultra, and right now you can get a double discount when you clip the coupon on Amazon's page and then use my code during checkout. That's going to give you a total of $70 off Fantik's X9 Ultra, but it's only over the next few days. So be quick, hit that link in the description and save $70 on Fantik's X9 Ultra. So rolling underneath the Bentley, the AC compressor is one of the easiest accessories to put your hands on, but like I showed you, there are a couple bolts that are impossible to get to without the entire front end of this car off. But we're going to try and attack this valve right here. And luckily, it's in probably one of the best locations to get the most access. So we basically just got to get this electrical connector off right here. And then there's a little clip holding it in place. We might have to go in from behind this bar here, or if I use the proper angle tool, maybe we just get it right there. But otherwise, there's a shot that we can pop this out, replace it, and get our AC back without having to remove the entire front end. Even though our access is pretty good here, the snap ring pliers are just too large to pull this clip. So I just used an angle pick and it popped right out. Now this valve is pressed in and I couldn't pull it out with just my finger. So a little pry with a screwdriver got it loose and then it slid right out of place. So in like 10 minutes, including the time it took to put the Bentley up on ramps, we've got this valve out of the AC compressor. I'll be honest, I'm pretty skeptical that just replacing this is actually going to bring back our cold air conditioning, but I did send a picture of it over to Ryan at RKX. He has sent over the appropriate one, and he said that this looks good. I mean, there's no way to actually tell whether this has failed by just looking at it, but he said that when a compressor has a serious problem and fails internally, you'll get like metal on metal contact, almost like an engine failing, and there'll be glitter all over this thing. So we can do a quick bench test and send power to this, see if it clicks on and off. Otherwise, this is just one of those fixes that's kind of like a gamble. You spend 50 bucks on it and hope it works, and it will really pay off if it does. All right, so I have a couple test leads hooked up to our test battery here. I'm going to just clamp one terminal, and here's the other one. Let's listen. You can definitely hear a click. It's very quiet. I don't know if it's supposed to be that weak, but something in there is at least trying to move. I did a little bit more searching around, and the auto repair guys here on YouTube have a great video on how to test one of these valves with a balloon. So we've got an inflated balloon here, and they tell you to just kind of put it over the valve up to the part where you see the screens. All right, the balloon is pretty well sealed around one of the O-rings here. That's good, but what's not good is that this valve in resting position with no power to it should be open. So we should hear air coming out of these screens right here. From what I understand, when you send the 12 volts to it, which we'll listen for right now, you can hear it trying to click closed. You can even see a little arcing going on in there if you look, but it's not doing anything. So maybe this valve really is failed. I'm not sure how accurate or scientific this test is because the balloon probably isn't putting as nearly as much pressure as an AC system would on the valve here, but you could see the balloon is clearly not deflating. You can hear that it's not deflating, and well, there's no power being sent to it. So In theory, this valve has failed, and it's failed in the closed position. Now, just a couple days later, our replacement valve showed up, and with the results of the balloon test, I wasn't just anxious to test the valve out, I was confident it would fix our AC problems for literally 1% of the original dealer quote in just a few minutes. And just like it came out, it went back in pretty easy, but a quick note: the valve needs to be pressed firmly back in place and the snap ring secured against the groove. If not, it'll pop out of place once you charge the AC system due to the pressure. Please don't worry about how I know all this, just use a screwdriver and a hammer to lightly tap it back in its cavity. With everything secure, I pulled a vacuum on our AC system for a good long while and made sure it would hold after about an hour or so. In the case that the valve wasn't quite in all the way or we did something wrong, the system would probably lose its vacuum, so it's good just to take your time during this part to assure you don't end up losing any of your refrigerant. Now it was time for the moment of truth. I hooked up a refrigerant bottle to the gauges and started attempting to charge, but no matter what, I couldn't get the car to take in an adequate amount of refrigerant. The gauges were similar to before, showing the same numbers on both high and low sides, and after several attempts, I figured that our compressor was just shot. Well, this was definitely worth a shot, and at least we tried, but this time I really got serious about removing the front end of the Bentley. So I rolled out the hoist. But being the procrastinator that I am, I knew that there was one last thing I had to do before tearing the front end of this Bentley off, and that was order the AC compressor so at least it would be en route to me by the time I had everything disassembled. Well, I just put it back in place and be on my way. So I got online and found something that I hadn't seen before when I initially got this car several weeks ago, and that was that a company here in Florida is actually selling a remanufactured AC compressor for the Bentley Bentayga. I was just planning on going to the Porsche dealership because this car is basically a Cayenne and buying one from them for about $1,500. But this remanufactured one only costs $400. Besides the huge cost savings, I was wondering if they're remanufacturing Bentley Bentayga AC compressors, what exactly inside them is failing. So I called the company, a human answered, and they sent me to their mechanic shop. So not only are they remanufacturing these parts, they're also servicing the cars. So when the tech answered and I mentioned Bentley Bentayga, he goes, well, just bring the car to us. You know, we've already done a couple of them. It's a really big job. The whole front end has to come off. I'm like, don't remind me, but I'm like 5 hours away from this shop, so it wasn't realistic to travel there. But I told him I'm probably going to end up buying your AC compressor. I'm just curious, what are you finding that is failing inside since you're rebuilding them? And he goes, well, it's the valve. And the second he said that, he also followed up by going, but that still means you got to pull the whole front end of the car off. Anyway, that made me realize that we've got a man-made problem here more than anything else. Now, if you've ever shopped a car part, the likelihood that you've bought a remanufactured one is probably pretty high, especially when it comes to your accessories. I've seen a ton of reman power steering pumps, alternators, and of course, AC compressors. And it made me think, what actually is going into this rebuild or remanufacturing process to make these things like new? Take your power steering pump, for example. A lot of time what's failing inside these are seals, maybe a bearing or two, and sometimes your pulley gets old and worn out on the front. So they take these seals out, they put in a new bearing, and of course put on a fresh pulley. They paint it a solid color, and here you go. You've got a remanufactured power steering pump. When it comes to alternators, from what I understand, voltage regulators inside these fail a lot, so they open them up, they put in a new voltage regulator, they clean them up, close them up, paint them silver, and there's your remanufactured alternator. But if you've ever seen the inside of an AC compressor, it's almost like the inside of your engine. There's cylinders, there's pistons, and a lot of small intricate parts. And when your AC compressor fails internally, you'll have metal on metal contact and you'll see shavings all over the place, just like if your engine blows. And 9 out of 10 times when your engine blows, it's way more efficient to go source a new or used replacement engine than to rebuild the one that you already have. Applying this logic to AC compressors, well, there's only really a few serviceable items on these things. On the clutch style ones, you can have a failed clutch. You could again put a new pulley on them. And of course, in the style that we have, these refrigerant control valves are known to fail, and it is obviously easily serviceable. So to have the best chance of success this time around, I ran out and got a new set of rental AC gauges, hooked everything back up, and repeated the process. And it's really amazing what you'll notice when you have a fresh start. While everything kind of reacted the same at first, I noticed that the refrigerant can was barely changing temperature. When you recharge your AC system, these things get freezing cold. So I messed with the valve on top and I figured out the problem instantly. Now I know this is a stupid mistake, but the last time I did a complete recharge of an AC system, it was a while back, right before they added valves to all these cans. It used to be that you would pierce the top of the old cans and then the refrigerant would flow out freely, but a few years ago they added valves to all of these refrigerant cans, and these valves require a new style adapter. They're cheap and readily available, and it looks and reacts the same way as the old style, but instead of there being a needle to pop the metal, it has a plunger that opens the valve up. Basically, when I turn the fitting all the way down, it would be like if you put your finger over a water leak. While the leak will greatly slow, a little water will still come out, and the same thing was happening with the valve all the way down. Only a tiny bit of refrigerant would come out. Basically, this plunger should only be moved about halfway down, and then the refrigerant will flow freely. Once I moved it, the compressor sucked in the refrigerant, the gauges started moving, and the temperature in the Bentley started dropping. Finally, you can see the can sweating here. It's really cold to the touch. It's actually working, and our numbers are actually reading two different sets of values. So we've got the low side around 25, the high side a little bit over 100. We're not even one can in yet. This is gonna take over 2 cans. So here we go, look at this. Uh-oh, look at this. No way. It's starting to drop. We're getting a little bit of action. The air is still pretty warm. Let's check what we've got going on over here. Oh, this can is empty. I can feel it. This can is empty. Gonna tighten off the low side here, the connector off, and get another can on. We got so lucky here, and the luck wasn't just the quick and easy AC valve replacement, it was the timing of Ryan's message. If he would have emailed me just one day past when he did, I would have likely had the entire front end of this car in pieces. And I really learned a lot here. If you did too, be sure to hit that like button. And if your car has warm AC that you've been putting off fixing, just know there might be an alternative budget solution, and RKX has some great information on how to diagnose and replace these AC valves. I've dropped a link to them down in the description. With the Bentley pretty well sorted, I deemed it my new daily driver, which is by far the newest and nicest car I've had in a long time. Just 4 or 5 miles down the road, a chime went off, as well as a large warning message on the dash. It says the coolant temperature is hot. I didn't touch anything to do with the coolant though. What in the heck? That's not good. Yeah, every time we get a car working, especially one that's this new, and then something breaks immediately after, a couple guys in the comments always say this has got to be fake. Now, in this case, totally wish it was, because I was looking forward to driving this car. But there's good news here, and that's that these cars break so often that there's already a service bulletin out on why it's overheating. The bad news is that service bulletin says that the whole front end of the car needs to come off in order to fix our problem.